The phone slipped from Alara's trembling fingers and clattered against the cracked linoleum floor of her kitchen. For 3 seconds, she stared at it, willing reality to rewind, willing the message to unsend itself, willing the universe to give her one single break from the relentless catastrophe that had become her life. But the screen glowed back at her, merciless and final. Message delivered. She'd sent a text begging for money to the wrong number, not to her sister Maya, whose contact she'd been frantically searching for on her phone while her 11-month-old daughter Lily screamed from the bedroom. Not to her former best friend, who'd already told her 3 times that the well had run dry. Not even to the social services caseworker who looked at her with that particular blend of pity and exhaustion that made Alara want to disappear into the floor. She'd sent it to a number she didn't recognize, a number that had somehow gotten saved in her contacts as emergency during some moment she couldn't even remember, probably when she was so sleep-deprived that entire days blurred together into one endless nightmare of survival. The message had been desperate, humiliating, and brutally honest. I need $200 by tomorrow, or they're shutting off the power. I have a baby. Please, I'll pay you back, I promise. I'm so sorry to ask. Alara picked up the phone with shaking hands and stared at the message thread. No response, just the blue checkmark confirming someone, somewhere, had read her desperation and was probably laughing at her stupidity. Lily's cries intensified from the bedroom, each wail driving into Alara's skull like a nail. She was hungry again. Always hungry, always needing, always depending on a mother who was failing at every single thing that mattered. Alara forced herself to stand, forced her legs to carry her to the bedroom, where Lily lay in the second-hand crib, her face red and scrunched with fury. She picked up her daughter, feeling the familiar weight of her, the warmth of her small body, and began the automatic bouncing motion that sometimes, if she was lucky, would bring silence. I'm sorry, Alara whispered into Lily's soft hair. I'm so sorry, baby. Mommy's trying. I promise I'm trying. Her phone buzzed. Alara nearly dropped at Lily in her haste to check it. Her heart hammered as she swiped to see the notification. Bank alert. Deposit of $500 received. Current balance, $523.47. She stared at the screen, certain she was hallucinating. She refreshed the banking app. The number remained, $500, from an account labeled simply, Wire Transfer, C. Thorne. Before she could process what was happening, another message appeared from the unknown number. Power stays on. Baby eats. No repayment necessary. Good luck. Alara's legs gave out. She sank onto the edge of her bed, still clutching Lily, staring at the messages like they might evaporate if she blinked too hard. Who was C. Thorne? Why, strangers send $500 to someone they'd never met? What did they want in return? Because nobody in Alara's 26 years of life had ever given her something without expecting payment, financial, emotional, or otherwise. She should have been relieved. She should have been grateful. Instead, she felt a creeping sense of dread, like she'd just signed a contract she hadn't read, with terms she couldn't possibly fulfill. But the power would stay on, and that meant Lily would be warm tonight. And in the calculus of survival, that was all that mattered. 3 days later, Alara received another message from the same number. Job opening. Axiom Meridian Group. Financial Analysis Assistant. Apply today. Reference C. Thorne. She'd heard of Axiom Meridian Group the way you heard of mountains or oceans, as enormous, distant things that existed in a reality completely separate from your own. It was one of the largest investment firms in the state, managing billions in assets, occupying the top 15 floors of the gleaming Meridian Tower downtown. People who worked there wore suits that cost more than Alara's entire wardrobe. They drove cars she couldn't even name. They lived in a different universe. And yet here was an invitation, delivered by the same mysterious stranger who'd saved her from darkness and hunger. Alara looked at Lily, who was playing with a worn, stuffed rabbit on the floor, blissfully unaware of the impossible choice her mother was facing. Take the job and risk whatever strings were attached. Refuse it and stay trapped in this endless cycle of poverty, always one emergency away from complete collapse. She typed a response with trembling fingers. Why are you helping me? The answer came immediately. Because you asked. And because I believe in potential over circumstance, the job is real, the offer is sincere, the choice is yours. Alara sat in the Meridian Tower lobby, feeling like an alien who'd accidentally landed on the wrong planet. Everything here gleamed. The marble floors, the chrome fixtures, the perfectly coiffed receptionist behind a desk that probably cost more than Alara's entire year of rent. She was wearing her best outfit, which was a thrift store blazer with a small stain on the left sleeve that she'd tried to hide with a carefully positioned folder, and pants that were slightly too short. Lily was strapped to her chest in a baby carrier, miraculously asleep, her small face peaceful against Alara's collarbone. The receptionist had looked at them with barely concealed surprise when they'd arrived, then quickly masked it with professional politeness. "Ms. Chen?" A woman in her 40s approached, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I'm Serena Blackwood, Chief Operations Officer. Welcome to Axiom Meridian." Alara stood, awkwardly juggling the folder while trying not to jostle Lily. "Thank you for seeing me. I know this is unusual. The baby, I mean. I couldn't find childcare on such short notice, and We have a nursery on the 12th floor," Serena interrupted smoothly. "State licensed, fully staffed. Many of our employees use it. You're welcome to tour it after our meeting." Alara blinked. "You have a nursery?" "Mr. Thorne believes that talent shouldn't be restricted by circumstance," Serena said, gesturing toward the elevator. "Follow me, please." The elevator rose so smoothly that Alara barely felt it moving. They passed floor after floor of glass walls and sleek workstations, each one looking like a scene from a movie about successful people living successful lives. At the 42nd floor, the doors opened to reveal an office that made Alara's breath catch. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city, which stretched out below them like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. The furniture was minimalist, but clearly expensive, all clean lines and purpose. And behind a massive desk made of dark wood sat a man who looked like he'd been designed by someone who understood power. Caleb Thorne was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair cut precisely, gray eyes that seemed to see straight through artifice to truth, and the kind of composure that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you were capable of. He stood when they entered, and Alara noticed he moved with deliberate care, as if conscious of taking up space. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice low and measured. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Alara sat, hyper-aware of Lily's weight against her chest, of the stain on her blazer, of the enormous gap between this man's world and her own. "Mr. Thorne, I need to be honest with you. I don't understand why I'm here. I have no formal education beyond high school. I've been working as a waitress and house cleaner for the past 6 years. I have no qualifications for anything in a place like this." "You're wrong on multiple counts," Caleb said, settling back into his chair. "You graduated high school with a 4.0 GPA despite working 30 hours a week to support your family. You taught yourself basic accounting to manage the books for 3 small businesses while waitressing. You have an intuitive understanding of financial patterns that most people with MBAs never develop. And most importantly, you asked for help when you needed it, which demonstrates more intelligence than most of the people who work in this building." Alara stared at him. "You investigated me?" "I verified that my instinct was correct," he replied calmly. "When you sent that message, I looked up the number. I found your employment history, your references from former employers, your credit report. I saw someone intelligent and capable who'd been crushed by circumstances beyond her control. So I asked myself, what would happen if I removed those circumstances?" "This isn't charity," Serena interjected, her tone professional but not unkind. "We need someone to review financial reports, flag inconsistencies, and compile data. It's entry-level work, but it requires attention to detail and pattern recognition. Based on your history, we believe you can do it." "The nursery is free for employees," Caleb added. "Health insurance starts immediately. Salary is $55,000 annually, with performance reviews every 6 months. If you're good at this, and I suspect you will be, there's room for advancement." $55,000. Alara felt dizzy. That was more than double what she'd made in the past year combining all her various jobs. That was stability. That was a future. "What do you want from me?" she asked, because she'd learned the hard way that generosity always had a price. Caleb's expression didn't change. Competence, integrity, a willingness to speak up when you see something wrong. That's all. And if I fail? Then we'll part ways professionally, he said, but I don't think you will. Alara looked down at Lily, who was starting to stir against her chest. She thought about the apartment with its cracked linoleum and broken heating. She thought about the panic she felt every time an unexpected bill arrived. She thought about her daughter growing up watching her mother struggle and learning that struggle was all there was. When do I start? She asked. 3 weeks into her new position at Axiom Meridian, Alara had developed a routine that felt simultaneously surreal and sustainable. She'd drop Lily at the nursery on the 12th floor where the staff, warm professional women who treated every child like they mattered, would take her daughter with genuine smiles. Then she'd head to her small office on the 38th floor, where she'd spend 8 hours reviewing financial reports, flagging irregularities, and slowly building an understanding of how enormous amounts of money moved through complex systems. The work was intellectually demanding, in a way that satisfied something in her she hadn't known existed. She was good at it, better than good. She could spot patterns in spreadsheets the way some people could identify songs from their opening notes. Serena had already commended her twice for catching errors that would have cost the company significant money, but she'd also started noticing things that felt wrong. It was subtle at first, transactions that didn't quite match their descriptions, transfers that seemed to route through unnecessarily complex pathways, amounts that were just slightly off in ways that would be easy to miss if you weren't paying close attention. None of it was obviously illegal, but all of it felt deliberate. Someone was manipulating the books, and they were good at it. Alara sat at her desk on a Thursday afternoon, staring at a particularly suspicious series of transactions when her office phone rang. It was Caleb's assistant. "Mr. Thorne would like to see you. Are you available now?" Her heart hammered as she rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. Had she done something wrong? Was this the moment where the dream job turned into a nightmare? But when she entered Caleb's office, he gestured to a chair with the same calm courtesy he'd shown during their first meeting. "You've been flagging inconsistencies in the quarterly reports," he said without preamble. "Walk me through what you found." Alara took a breath and pulled out the folder she'd been compiling. "There's a pattern of small transfers, never more than $10,000 at a time, moving from client accounts through intermediary holding accounts and eventually disappearing into what looked like legitimate operational expenses. But when I cross-reference the operational expenses with actual vendor invoices, the amounts don't match. Someone's skimming, and they're doing it in a way that's designed to stay under audit thresholds." Caleb's expression remained neutral, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. "How much are we talking about?" "Over the past 18 months, approximately $400,000. The silence that followed was so complete that Alara could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, Caleb leaned back in his chair and said, "I've suspected this for months, but I couldn't prove it, and I couldn't identify who was responsible without evidence. You just gave me that evidence." "What happens now?" Alara asked. "Now, we figure out who's behind it," Caleb said, "and we do it carefully because whoever this is has been operating undetected for 18 months. That suggests either significant skill or significant protection within the company." "Or both," Serena said from the doorway, where she'd apparently been listening. She entered the office and closed the door behind her. "There are only 3 people with the access and expertise to pull this off. Marcus Vale, our chief financial officer, Thomas Chen, head of investment operations, or myself." "It's not you," Caleb said immediately. "Appreciated, but we should verify." "That objectively," Serena replied. "If we're going to investigate this properly, no one can be above scrutiny." Alara watched the exchange, fascinated by the way they communicated, direct, efficient, devoid of ego. This was what functional professionalism looked like, she realized. This was what it meant to work somewhere that valued truth over comfort. "Ms. Chen," Caleb said, turning his attention back to her, "you're now involved in something potentially dangerous. The person behind this embezzlement has a lot to lose if they're exposed. I need you to understand that before you commit to helping us. You can walk away right now, continue your regular duties, and I'll ensure you're protected from any fallout. Alara thought about Lily, safe and warm in the nursery 12 floors below. She thought about the apartment she'd just signed a lease on. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe, with working heat and a bedroom for her daughter. She thought about the stability this job represented, the future it promised. And then she thought about the kind of person she wanted Lily to see when she looked at her mother. "I'll help," she said. "What do you need me to do?" Over the next 2 weeks, Alara became a detective in her own office. She built spreadsheets tracking every suspicious transaction, cross-referenced them with personnel schedules to identify who had access when, and slowly pieced together a profile of the embezzler. They were methodical, patient, and arrogant, the kind of person who believed they were smarter than everyone around them. The evidence pointed increasingly toward Marcus Vale. He had the access, the expertise, and the authority to manipulate records without raising immediate suspicion. But more than that, he had the personality. Alara had observed him during company meetings, watched the way he spoke over people, dismissed concerns, and projected an air of unassailable competence that discouraged questioning. She was in her office. Late one evening, Lily asleep in her carrier beside the desk, when Marcus himself appeared in her doorway. He was 53, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Chen," he said smoothly. "Working late?" "Just finishing some reports," she replied, instinctively closing the spreadsheet on her screen. "I've heard good things about your work," Marcus continued, stepping into her office uninvited. "Very thorough, very detail-oriented. Serena says you caught several errors that could have been costly." "Just doing my job." "Indeed." He moved closer, and Alara felt her muscles tense. "I've been reviewing some of the flags you've raised in the quarterly reports. Very interesting observations. Very thorough. Perhaps too thorough for someone so new to the industry." There was a threat buried in his pleasant tone, and Alara heard it clearly. She kept her expression neutral. "I just report what I see in the data." "Data can be misleading," Marcus said. "Context matters. Experience matters. Someone without that context might see patterns that aren't really there, might raise concerns that cause unnecessary disruption, or might see patterns that everyone else missed because they're too close to the situation," Alara countered quietly. Marcus's smile tightened. "You're a single mother, correct? With a young child to support? This job must be very important to you. It would be unfortunate if your excessive vigilance created problems that affected your employment here." Lily stirred in her carrier, making a small sound, and Marcus's gaze flicked to her. Something in his expression made Alara's blood run cold, the casual way he acknowledged her daughter's existence, as if to remind her exactly what she had to lose. "Is there something specific you need from me, Mr. Vale?" Alara asked, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "Just offering friendly advice," he said, already moving toward the door. "Sometimes it's wise to focus on the job you were hired to do, rather than looking for problems that aren't your concern. Have a good evening, Ms. Chen." After he left, Alara sat in silence, her hands shaking. She picked up her phone and sent a message to Caleb. "We need to talk. It's urgent." 20 minutes later, she was in Caleb's office, with Serena present as well, recounting the conversation. Caleb's expression grew darker as she spoke. "He threatened you," Caleb said flatly when she finished. "He implied consequences," Alara corrected. "He was very careful not to say anything explicitly actionable." "That's his method," Serena said grimly. "Marcus has been with this company for 15 years. He knows exactly how to operate within the boundaries of plausible deniability." "But he just confirmed our suspicions," Caleb said, leaning forward. "He wouldn't have approached you if he wasn't worried about what you're finding. That means we're close." "It also means Alara's now a target," Serena pointed out. "We need to consider her safety." "I'm not quitting," Alara said immediately. "If I quit now, he wins, and he'll just continue stealing from this company, and everyone will pretend not to notice because confronting him is inconvenient." Caleb studied her for a long moment. "You understand that this could get worse before it gets better? Marcus has allies on the board. He's been here long enough to build relationships that will make removing him complicated even with evidence." "I understand," Alara said, But I've spent my entire adult life being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like I don't matter because I'm poor and uneducated and disposable. For once in my life, I'm in a position where I can actually do something that matters. I'm not walking away from that. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of something fundamental. All right, then we do this properly. Serena, I want Alara's employment contract restructured to include whistleblower protections, make it ironclad, and I want documentation of everything, every interaction with Marcus, every finding, every conversation we have about this investigation. Already done, Serena said, pulling out a folder. I anticipated this would escalate. We're also bringing in external help, Caleb continued. I have a contact, Jonah Pierce, an investigator who specializes in corporate fraud. He's expensive, but he's thorough, and he's not connected to anyone in this company. He can provide the kind of objective verification we'll need if this goes to court. Will it go to court? Alara asked. If the evidence is as damning as I think it is, Marcus will fight exposure with everything he has, Caleb said. People like him don't accept accountability gracefully. The next week brought a stranger kind of warfare, one conducted through CCD emails, carefully documented conversations, and the methodical building of an unassailable case. Jonah Pierce arrived on a Monday morning, a lean man in his 50s with sharp eyes and the kind of quiet competence that reminded Alara of Caleb. He reviewed her findings, asked pointed questions, and within 3 days had traced the embezzled funds to offshore accounts controlled by shell corporations that ultimately led back to Marcus. But evidence gathering created its own dangers. Marcus knew something was happening, even if he didn't yet know the full scope of the investigation. He began appearing more frequently in Alara's section of the building, always with plausible reasons, always with that same pleasant smile that didn't reach his eyes. He spoke to her colleagues, asking casual questions about her work habits, her thoroughness, whether she seemed stressed or unstable. It was a character assassination conducted in whispers, and Alara felt its effects. People who'd been friendly became distant. Colleagues who'd asked her to lunch stopped inviting her. She overheard a conversation in the break room where someone said, I heard she's been making wild accusations. Single mothers sometimes crack under pressure, you know. The isolation was deliberate and effective, and if Alara had been less stubborn or less angry, it might have worked. But she'd spent too many years surviving to be broken by social discomfort. She kept her head down, continued her work, and documented everything. On a Thursday afternoon, Marcus made his final play. He called Alara to his office, a power move designed to remind her of the hierarchy she was challenging. His office was on the 41st floor, ostentatiously decorated with awards and photographs of him with various politicians and celebrities. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, projecting authority. Ms. Chen, thank you for coming, he said, gesturing to a chair. I think it's time we had an honest conversation. Alara sat, keeping her expression neutral. In her pocket, her phone was recording, something Jonah had insisted she do for any private meeting with Marcus. I've been with this company for 15 years, Marcus began. I've built systems, managed billions in assets, and created protocols that have made Axiom Meridian one of the most successful firms in the region. I've earned my position here through competence and dedication. I don't doubt that, Alara said carefully. And yet, you've spent the past month making accusations that undermine not just my reputation, but the stability of this entire company, Marcus continued, his voice hardening. You've been here less than 2 months. You have no formal education, no industry experience, no understanding of the complexities you're attempting to police. And somehow you've convinced Caleb Thorne, a man I've worked alongside for a decade, that I'm a criminal. I haven't made any accusations, Alara said quietly. I've reported data irregularities to my supervisor as required by company policy. If those irregularities implicate you, that's not my doing. That's yours. Marcus's pleasant facade cracked. Do you understand what you're risking? You have a child who depends on you for everything. What happens to her when you lose this job? When no other company will hire you because you've been marked as a troublemaker? When you're back in that miserable apartment with no power and no food? Alara felt ice settle in her stomach. Are you threatening my daughter? I'm stating facts, Marcus said coldly. Actions have consequences. You're playing in a world you don't understand, making enemies you can't afford to have. I'm offering you a way out. Walk away from whatever Caleb has convinced you to do. Admit you made mistakes in your analysis. And in return, I'll ensure you're transferred to a different department with a substantial raise. Your daughter gets a secure future. You get to keep your dignity. Everyone wins. Except the people you've been stealing from, Alara said. Marcus's expression went flat. You're making a mistake. I've made plenty of those, Alara replied, standing. But this isn't one of them. Is there anything else you need, Mr. Vale? He stood as well, and for a moment she thought he might physically block her exit. But instead he said, very quietly, You'll regret this, I promise you that. Alara walked out of his office on shaking legs, took the elevator directly to the 42nd floor, and handed her still recording phone to Caleb. He listened to the entire conversation with Jonah and Serena present, his expression growing darker with each word. When the recording ended, Caleb set the phone down carefully. He just threatened a subordinate employee and attempted to bribe her into silence. Even with board protection, he can't survive this if we handle it correctly. We need to move quickly, Jonah said. He knows he's cornered. Cornered people are dangerous. Alara, effective immediately. You're working remotely, Caleb said. I'm not having you in this building where Marcus has access to you. Serena will arrange secure access to all the systems you need. Jonah will coordinate with you on final evidence compilation, and I'm scheduling an emergency board meeting for Monday. What will you tell them? Alara asked. The truth, Caleb replied, that we have evidence of systematic embezzlement conducted by our CFO over 18 months, totaling more than $400,000, that we have documented attempts at witness intimidation and bribery, and that the person who discovered this is a junior analyst who's been here less than 2 months because she had the integrity and intelligence to see what the rest of us missed. The board won't like hearing that, Serena warned. The board can be uncomfortable, Caleb said flatly. What they can't do is ignore evidence this comprehensive. Marcus has been stealing from our clients, from people who trusted us with their money. That's not a PR problem. That's a fundamental betrayal of our purpose as a company, and I won't protect someone who's done that, regardless of his tenure or his relationships. That weekend, Alara worked from the small apartment that had become her sanctuary, with Lily playing on the floor beside her makeshift desk. She compiled the final documentation, every transaction traced, every offshore account identified, every attempted cover-up exposed. It was meticulous work, the kind that would survive legal scrutiny, the kind that told an undeniable story. On Sunday evening, Jonah reviewed everything and said, This is airtight. Even with expensive lawyers, Marcus won't be able to explain this away. You did good work, Ms. Chen. Alara, she corrected, and thank you. Can I ask you something? Jonah said. Why did you risk everything for this? You could have looked the other way. Keep your head down. Protect yourself and your daughter. Alara looked at Lily, who was concentrating on stacking blocks with the kind of fierce determination that reminded Alara of herself. Because I want her to grow up knowing that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I've spent too much of my life feeling powerless. I'm not going to teach her that powerlessness is the only option. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Caleb had arranged for Alara to attend remotely via video conference, both to ensure her safety and to put a face to the analyst whose work had exposed the fraud. She sat in her apartment, Lily with a neighbor, watching the screen as board members filed into the conference room. She recognized some of them from company materials, wealthy, influential people accustomed to having power and wielding it comfortably. Marcus was among them, looking calm and confident, clearly believing he could still control the narrative. Caleb began the presentation with characteristic precision. He laid out the evidence methodically, building from the initial irregularities Alara had identified through to the comprehensive fraud investigation that had followed. He showed the transaction trails, the offshore accounts, the pattern of theft that had persisted for 18 months. And then he played the recording of Marcus's attempted bribery and threats. The room went silent. Alara watched Marcus's face on the screen, saw the moment he realized he'd lost. His confidence crumbled, replaced by something between panic and rage. He stood abruptly. This is absurd. These accusations are being driven by a junior analyst with no credentials and an obvious agenda. She's been here 2 months. How can you possibly trust her analysis over my 15 years of service? Because her analysis is correct, Jonah said calmly, stepping into view. I'm Jonah Pierce, independent investigator. I've verified every finding Ms. Chen made. I've traced the funds. I've documented the cover-ups. And I've identified the offshore accounts holding stolen money. This isn't an interpretation. This is fact. And the recording speaks for itself, Serena added. You threatened an employee. You attempted to bribe her into silence. Even if somehow the embezzlement could be explained away, which it can't, those actions alone are terminable offenses. One of the board members, an older woman named Patricia Chen, spoke up. Mr. Vale, do you have anything to say in your defense? Marcus looked around the room, seeing his allies' faces close off, recognizing that his carefully built protection had evaporated in the face of undeniable evidence. I want my attorney, he said finally. That's your right, Caleb replied. But as of this moment, you're suspended without pay pending formal investigation. Security will escort you from the building. Your access to all company systems has been revoked, and we'll be coordinating with law enforcement regarding criminal charges. Security entered the conference room, and Marcus was led out. He looked directly at the camera where he knew Alara was watching, and the hatred in his eyes was so intense she involuntarily stepped back from her screen. After he left, Patricia Chen addressed Caleb. This is a catastrophe for our reputation. This is justice for our clients, Caleb corrected. Yes, it's embarrassing that this happened under our watch, but it would be infinitely worse if we'd covered it up or allowed it to continue. We're issuing a public statement today acknowledging the fraud, assuring clients that all stolen funds will be recovered and restored, and implementing new oversight protocols to prevent future occurrences. And we're being transparent about how this was discovered by an entry-level analyst who had the competence and integrity to see what needed to be seen. What happens to the analyst? Another board member asked. That's up to her, Caleb said, turning to the camera. Alara, you're on screen. Suddenly, the board's attention shifted to her, and Alara felt her pulse spike. She was acutely aware of her small apartment behind her, of her bargain furniture, and her obvious poverty visible in the frame. But she held her shoulders straight and met their gazes through the screen. Ms. Chen, Patricia said, Mr. Thorne speaks very highly of your work, and clearly that praise is warranted. What are your plans moving forward? I'd like to continue working here, if that's possible, Alara said honestly. I believe in what this company is trying to do, or at least what Mr. Thorne believes it should do. We'd like to offer you a position, Patricia said. Formal title, Junior Compliance Analyst, salary commensurate with the value you've demonstrated, and a seat in the meetings where we discuss the new oversight systems we're implementing, because you've clearly got insights we need. Alara felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to. Let them fall. Thank you. I accept. After the meeting ended, after the formal statements had been issued and the legal proceedings initiated, Caleb called Alara directly. You did good work, he said. Not just competent work, important work. You saved this company from itself. I just reported what I saw, Alara replied. No, Caleb said firmly. You chose integrity over comfort. You chose truth over safety. That's rare, especially when the person making that choice has as much to lose as you did. I'm grateful to you, and I promise you'll be protected here. Can I ask you something? Alara said. Why did you help me that first time? When I sent you that message asking for money, you could have ignored it, deleted it, reported it as spam. Why did you respond? Caleb was quiet for a moment. My mother raised me alone after my father died. She worked 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed, and she had this saying, help isn't charity when you give people what they've already earned. You earned a chance through your intelligence and your resilience. All I did was remove the obstacles preventing you from showing it. The rest was always your own capability. Alara understood then that the text message hadn't been a mistake. It had been a door opening, a confluence of desperation and opportunity that had rewritten the trajectory of her entire life. And she'd walked through that door, not because she was special, but because she'd been willing to risk asking for help and then willing to work impossibly hard once that help arrived. 6 months later, Alara sat in her new office on the 39th floor, reviewing reports that would never have been on her desk in her old life. Lily was in the nursery downstairs, thriving under the care of people who genuinely loved working with children. The apartment Alara had upgraded to had 2 bedrooms, reliable heat, and windows that looked out over the city instead of a brick wall. Marcus Vale had pleaded guilty to embezzlement and was serving 3 years in federal prison. The $400,000 had been recovered and returned to clients. Axiom Meridian had implemented new oversight systems designed to prevent similar fraud, with Alara consulted on their development. And Caleb Thorne had kept that original text message framed in his office with a small plaque beneath it. Potential over circumstance. Alara knew she wasn't special. She was just someone who'd been drowning, who'd asked for a hand, and who'd found someone willing to believe that desperation didn't define capability. She was someone who'd been given a chance and had refused to waste it, even when taking that chance meant risking everything she'd only just gained. But what she hadn't expected was how the story would continue to unfold, how one act of courage would create ripples that extended far beyond her own life. The board meeting where Patricia Chen had offered her the promotion had been just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Alara found herself increasingly involved in restructuring Axiom Meridian's internal controls. She worked alongside Serena to develop new protocols, participated in interviews for Marcus's replacement, and discovered that her perspective, the perspective of someone who'd lived on the margins, who understood what it meant to be dismissed and underestimated, was actually valuable in ways she'd never imagined. "You see blind spots," Serena explained during one of their working lunches. "The rest of us have been operating in this world so long that we've internalized certain assumptions about how things work. You question those assumptions because you haven't been indoctrinated into accepting them." It was true. Alara found herself constantly asking why in meetings where everyone else seemed to accept processes as inevitable. Why did certain reports require 3 levels of approval while others required none? Why were some departments audited quarterly while others went years without review? Why did the company's ethics hotline go to the legal department rather than an independent third party? Some of her questions were dismissed as naive, but increasingly, people started realizing that naive was just another word for uncorrupted by complacency. 3 months after Marcus's conviction, Caleb called Alara to his office for what he said was an important conversation. She arrived to find not just Caleb and Serena, but also Patricia Chen and 2 other board members she recognized from the emergency meeting. "Ms. Chen," Patricia began, "we've been discussing the changes you've helped implement over the past several months. The new oversight systems have already identified 2 additional instances of misconduct, nothing on the scale of Vale's theft, but significant enough that they would have continued unchecked without your protocols." "I'm glad they're working," Alara said carefully, unsure where this was heading. "They're working because you understand something fundamental that many of us have forgotten," Caleb said. "You understand that integrity isn't just a value statement in an employee handbook. It's a daily practice that requires constant vigilance and the courage to speak up even when it's uncomfortable." "We want to expand your role," Patricia continued. "We're creating a new position, Director of Ethical Compliance. It would report directly to the board rather than through the management chain, ensuring independence. The salary would be $130,000 annually, with full benefits and the authority to initiate investigations without requiring approval from department heads." Alara felt like the air had been sucked from the room. "Director? I've been here less than a year. I don't have any formal credentials. You have something better than credentials," Serena interrupted. "You have proven judgment and demonstrated courage. Those can't be taught in business school." "But I'm still learning," Alara protested. "I make mistakes. I don't always understand the complexities of the decisions being made at higher levels." "That's exactly why we want you in this role," Caleb said. "Because you ask questions when you don't understand rather than pretending competence you don't have. Because you're willing to admit uncertainty. Because you care more about getting things right than about protecting your ego." Patricia leaned forward. "Ms. Chen, I've been on corporate boards for 30 years. I've seen dozens of compliance officers come and go. Most of them are lawyers who understand regulations but have no instinct for actual wrongdoing. They check boxes and file reports and create the appearance of oversight without its substance. You're different. You see patterns. You trust your instincts. And most importantly, you can't be intimidated because you've already survived things far worse than anything we could threaten you with." That last observation, struck Alara with particular force. It was true. What could Axiom Meridian do to her that was worse than the poverty she'd already escaped? The worst they could do was fire her, and she'd already proven she could survive that. The fear that kept most people compliant, the fear of losing status, comfort, security, didn't have the same hold on someone who'd lived without those things for most of their life. If I accept this, Alara said slowly, I need certain guarantees. I need the authority to investigate anyone in this company, including board members, without requiring their permission. I need protection from retaliation that's enforceable and explicit. And I need to know that when I identify problems, there will be actual consequences, not just polite acknowledgement followed by quiet burial. The board members exchanged glances. Finally, Patricia nodded. Those terms are acceptable. We'll draft a contract that makes your independence explicit and your protections ironclad. You'll report directly to me as board chair, and I'll ensure that your findings are acted upon. Then I accept, Alara said, feeling the weight of what she'd just agreed to settle onto her shoulders. Over the next year, Alara transformed from someone who'd been invisible into someone who couldn't be ignored. She built a small team, carefully selected people who shared her commitment to integrity over comfort, and together they conducted systematic reviews of every department. They found inefficiencies, conflicts of interest, questionable vendor relationships, and patterns of behavior that, while not illegal, created cultures where misconduct could flourish. Some executives resented her. She overheard conversations where she was called that woman from nowhere who thinks she knows better than people with decades of experience. Some board members questioned whether they'd given too much power to someone so young and inexperienced. But the results spoke for themselves. Axiom. Meridian's reputation improved, client retention increased, and the company attracted talent who wanted to work somewhere that took ethics seriously. And through it all, Lily grew. She turned 2, then 3. She started speaking in full sentences, asking questions about everything, displaying the same pattern recognition skills her mother possessed. The nursery staff loved her, and Alara sometimes worried that her daughter was getting spoiled by all the attention. But mostly, she was just grateful that Lily would grow up in a world where security was normal, where there was always enough food, where the power never got shut off. One evening, when Lily was 3.5, Alara was working late in her office when Caleb stopped by. He'd been traveling frequently, expanding Axiom Meridian's presence in international markets, and she hadn't seen him in several weeks. "You've been here since 6 this morning," he observed, leaning against her doorframe. "That's 14 hours. "Big presentation to the board tomorrow," Alara replied, not looking up from her laptop. "Want to make sure the data's airtight." "The data's always airtight when you prepare it," Caleb said. "You're the most thorough person I've ever worked with." "Thorough is just another word for paranoid," Alara said with a slight smile. "I keep expecting someone to find a flaw, to prove that I don't actually know what I'm doing." "Imposter syndrome," Caleb diagnosed. "Common among people who've achieved success they didn't think was possible. You know what the cure is?" "Therapy?" Alara guessed. "Time," Caleb said. "Eventually, you accumulate enough evidence of your competence that even you can't dismiss it. How many investigations have you conducted now?" 43. "And how many of them have been challenged or overturned?" "None," Alara admitted. "Exactly." Caleb moved into her office and sat in the chair across from her desk. "I wanted to talk to you about something. Patricia is retiring at the end of the year. The board is looking for a new chair." "That's a big change," Alara said. "Patricia's been invaluable." "She has," Caleb agreed, "and she's recommended you as her replacement." Alara's hands froze on her keyboard. "What?" "Board chair," Caleb repeated, "overseeing governance, ensuring accountability, representing shareholder interests. Patricia believes you're the right person for it." "Caleb, I'm 30 years old. I've been in corporate finance for less than 4 years. Board chairs are supposed to be people with decades of experience and extensive networks and often they're people so embedded in existing power structures that they're incapable of challenging them," Caleb interrupted. "Patricia wants someone who isn't beholden to anyone, who can't be manipulated by relationships or obligations, who will actually hold this company accountable to its stated values. She thinks that's you." "What do you think?" Alara asked. Caleb was quiet for a moment. his gray eyes studying her with that same intensity he'd shown during their first meeting. I think you're the person who saw fraud when everyone else was looking away. I think you're the person who risked everything to expose it. I think you're the person who spent the past 3 years proving that integrity isn't weakness, it's strength. And I think if you don't take this position, we'll end up with someone who's more interested in protecting the status quo than challenging it. I need to think about it, Alara said. Of course, Caleb replied, standing. But while you're thinking, remember something. That text message you sent me, the one asking for help, that took courage. Everything since then has been you demonstrating that courage wasn't a one-time thing. It's who you are. Don't let fear disguised as humility stop you from becoming who you're capable of being. After he left, Alara sat in her office, looking out at the city lights. She thought about the old girl who'd sent that desperate message, who'd been so afraid and so ashamed of needing help. She thought about how far she'd come, how much she'd learned, how many times she'd been proven capable of more than she'd believed possible. And she thought about Lily, who would grow up watching her mother navigate the world. What lessons did Alara want to teach her? That you should stay small and grateful for whatever scraps of opportunity you're given, or that you should claim the space you've earned and use it to make things better? The next morning, Alara called Patricia and accepted the nomination for board chair. The formal vote would happen in December, but Patricia assured her it was a formality. The board had already reached consensus. Why me? Alara asked. Really? Why someone with my background? Because your background is exactly why, Patricia replied. You know what it's like to be powerless. You know what it's like to be dismissed and underestimated. You know what it's like to need help and be afraid to ask for it. Those experiences didn't make you weak. They made you someone who understands that power is a responsibility, not a trophy. And that's the kind of person who should be overseeing a company that manages billions of dollars of other people's money. The board vote in December was unanimous. Alara Chen, 4 years removed from sleeping on a couch in a powerless apartment, became the board chair of Axiom Meridian Group. She was the youngest board chair of a major financial firm in the state. She was also the only one who'd ever been on food stamps. The announcement made headlines. Some of them were flattering. From poverty to power, the remarkable rise of Alara Chen. Others were skeptical. Unqualified outsider takes control of billion-dollar firm. A few were outright hostile, suggesting she was a diversity hire or that her relationship with Caleb Thorne was more than professional. Alara read the articles with detached interest. She'd learned by now that public opinion was fickle and largely irrelevant. What mattered was the work. What mattered was the standard she set and maintained. What mattered was proving, day after day, that competence and integrity mattered more than credentials and connections. On her first day as board chair, she instituted a new policy. Every board meeting would include 30 minutes for questions from any employee, submitted anonymously, about company practices or decisions. The other board members were horrified. This would create chaos, they argued. It would undermine authority. It would encourage complainers and troublemakers. Good, Alara said. Let's hear from the troublemakers. They're usually the ones noticing things everyone else is too comfortable to see. The first anonymous question came from someone in accounting. Why do executives get retention bonuses during years when the company is doing well, but regular employees don't get cost of living increases during those same years? It was a fair question, and Alara made sure it got a fair answer, which was because the compensation structure was designed by executives for executives, and nobody challenged it because challenging executive compensation is considered inappropriate. But you're right that it's inequitable. Let's fix that. Over the next 6 months, Axiom Meridian restructured its compensation system to ensure that prosperity was shared more broadly. Executive bonuses were tied to employee retention and satisfaction metrics, not just financial performance. Cost of living increases became automatic rather than discretionary. The nursery program that had been essential for Alara was expanded and made available to all employees at subsidized rates. Some executives quit, claiming the new policies were punitive to success. Alara let them go without regret. What she discovered was that losing people who viewed equity as punishment actually improved company culture, and through all of this, Caleb remained a steady presence. He'd stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic partnerships, but he and Alara met weekly to discuss company direction. Their working relationship had deepened into genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared values. One evening, after a particularly difficult board meeting where they'd had to terminate a senior executive for ethics violations, Caleb walked Alara to the parking garage. "You handled that well," he said. "Firing someone is never easy, especially someone who's been with the company for years." "It's easier when you know it's right," Alara replied. "He had multiple chances to correct his behavior. He chose not to. That's on him, not me." "Still," Caleb said, "I know it weighs on you. You care about people even when they've done wrong." Alara was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I tell you something? Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced this is all temporary, that I'm going to get a phone call telling me it was all a mistake, that someone realized I don't belong here, that I need to pack up Lily and go back to that apartment with the cracked linoleum." "That's not going to happen," Caleb said firmly. "I know," Alara said. "Intellectually, I know that. I've proven myself 100 times over. But there's this voice in my head that still sounds like every person who ever treated me like I was disposable, every boss who underpaid me, every landlord who threatened eviction, every social worker who looked at me like I was one more statistic of failure." "Those voices are liars," Caleb said. "You know that, right? They were always liars. They saw your circumstances and assumed those circumstances defined your capability. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now." "Why do you believe in me so much?" Alara asked. "Even at the beginning, when you had no evidence I could do any of this, you believed in me." "Why?" Caleb stopped walking and turned to face her, fully. "Because I recognized something in you that I'd seen in my mother. She raised me alone after my father died, worked 3 jobs, never complained, never gave up. And the whole time, people treated her like she was less than them because she was poor and uneducated. But she was smarter and more capable than most of the wealthy people I've met in my entire career. She just never got the chance to prove it. When you sent me that message, when I looked into your background, I saw someone like her. Someone brilliant and resilient who'd been buried under circumstances that had nothing to do with their actual capability. And I thought, what if I could give this person what my mother never got? What if I could remove the obstacles and see what happened?" "What happened was I almost got you sued by your own CFO," Alara said with a slight smile. "What happened was you saved this company from itself," Caleb corrected, "and then you transformed it into something better than it was, and now you're ensuring it stays that way. That text message was the best thing that ever happened to Axiom Meridian." They reached Alara's car, a modest sedan, nothing flashy, because even with her salary increase, she couldn't bring herself to spend money on luxury when she remembered so clearly what it was like to have nothing. Lily was asleep in her car seat in the back, having been picked up from the childcare center that had become her second home. "Thank you," Alara said quietly, "for everything, for seeing potential in a desperate message from a stranger, for protecting me when things got dangerous, for believing I could do more than I believed I could do." "You don't owe me gratitude," Caleb said. "You earned everything you have. I just opened a door. You walked through it and then kept walking, even when the path got difficult." Alara drove home through the city streets, Lily sleeping peacefully in the back, and thought about how much had changed since that night when she'd sent a message to the wrong number. She thought about the girl who'd been so desperate, so afraid, so convinced that she was trapped in poverty forever. And she thought about the woman she'd become, not perfect, not without doubt, but capable and strong and unwilling to accept injustice just because confronting it was uncomfortable. When she got home to the apartment she now rented in a safe neighborhood with good schools, she carried Lily inside and tucked her into bed. She stood in the doorway of her daughter's room for a long moment, watching her sleep, and whispered, "You're going to grow up in a world where people see you for who you are, not where you came from. I promise you that. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure that's true." And in her pocket, her phone buzzed with a message. She pulled it out, expecting work, but instead found a text from an unknown number. "Need help. Lost my job. Have 2 kids. Power getting shut off tomorrow. Sorry to bother you. Wrong number." "Probably," Alara stared at the message for a long moment. She could ignore it, delete it, let someone else's crisis remain someone else's problem. She'd earned the right to focus on her own life, to protect the stability she'd fought so hard to achieve. But she thought about Caleb's mother, who'd worked 3 jobs and never got the chance to prove her capability. She thought about all the people who were intelligent and resilient and capable, but buried under circumstances that had nothing to do with their actual worth. She thought about the girl she'd been, sending a desperate message to a stranger, hoping someone would see her as worth saving. She typed a response, "Not the wrong number. What's your address? I'll have the power company restore service tonight, and we should talk about that job situation. I might be able to help." Because that's what you did when you'd been saved by someone else's compassion. You paid it forward. You looked for the people who were drowning, and you offered them a hand. Not charity, not pity. Just a chance to prove what they were capable of when the obstacles were removed. 5 years after that first mistaken text message, Axiom Meridian Group was consistently rated as one of the best places to work in the state. They'd hired dozens of people from non-traditional backgrounds, many of them referred by Alara herself. They'd created pathways for people who'd been dismissed by traditional hiring practices because they lacked credentials or had gaps in their employment history or came from the wrong neighborhoods. And every single one of them proved that talent was everywhere, but opportunity wasn't. Given the chance, given the support, given the belief that they were worth investing in, people rose to meet expectations. They exceeded them. Alara stood in front of the staff at their annual company meeting, Lily now 8 years old and sitting in the front row, and said, 5 years ago, I was living in an apartment with no power, holding my baby daughter, trying to figure out how to survive one more day. I sent a message asking for help to the wrong number, or maybe it was exactly the right number, because the person who received it didn't see me as a charity case or a problem to be managed. He saw me as someone with potential who just needed obstacles removed. And that changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone this company has helped since then. She looked at Caleb, who was sitting on the stage beside her. Mr. Thorne taught me that dignity matters more than charity, that respect matters more than pity, that the best way to help people is to see their capability and give them the opportunity to prove it. We've built this company on that principle, and I promise you, we're going to keep building on it. Because nobody, and I mean nobody, should be invisible just because they're struggling. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves a chance. The applause was thunderous, and in the front row, Lily stood up and clapped hardest of all, looking at her mother like she was the most important person in the world. Because to Lily, she was. And that was enough. That was everything. Later that night, after the celebration had ended, and the staff had gone home, and Lily was asleep in her bed, Alara sat in the office that had once belonged to Marcus Vale. She'd had it completely redecorated, removing all traces of his tenure, but sometimes she still thought about him, about how close the company had come to ignoring his theft, about how easily it could have been buried, swept aside, rationalized as someone else's problem. On her desk was a framed photo of that first text message she'd sent to Caleb. He'd given it to her on her first anniversary with the company, mounted with a small brass plaque that read, "From desperation, possibility. From possibility, transformation. From transformation, hope." Alara ran her finger across the glass, tracing the words of that message she'd typed with shaking hands in a dark apartment while her baby cried. She'd been so ashamed of needing help, so convinced that asking made her weak. But she understood now that asking for help had been the strongest thing she'd ever done, because it took courage to admit vulnerability. It took strength to say, "I can't do this alone." It took intelligence to recognize that survival sometimes meant accepting assistance. And it took wisdom to turn that assistance into something bigger than yourself, to take the hand offered to you and then extend your own hand to others, to transform personal salvation into collective elevation. Her phone buzzed with another message, another wrong number probably, another person desperate and afraid. She opened it, read the plea for help, and smiled. "Not the wrong number," she typed. "Let's talk tomorrow. I think I might be able to help." Because that's what you did when you'd been given a second chance. You made sure others got theirs too, and sometimes, just sometimes, a wrong number was exactly right.